You were the governor of the state of Minnesota, known for having a large refugee population, Somali refugees, Hmong refugees. How did you react personally to the news of this executive order last week?
Well, I think in a couple ways. One is everybody should just take a step back and take a breath. For the most part, it's a 90-day moratorium, and so it's not a permanent moratorium. Could have been handled better. That's the second point. Obviously, in terms of people with green cards, people who are already on their way here, people who have already been properly vetted. But the idea that he's taking a 90-day pause, selecting certain countries that do have some history around some challenges relating to security, isn't, something that should set off this big of a reaction, but I understand the concern. So those are the two things. I don't think people should at least step back and take a breath and say it's a 90-day moratorium, it's not a permanent ban.
Is there an issue with stigma here? And if there is one, how did you deal with that as the governor of Minnesota?
Well, you always have to balance, of course, two competing values, one of which is the value of being open, having an open society, recognizing rights, being a country of immigrants, being a country that historically has welcomed reasonable number and properly vetted refugees, against some pretty obvious and pretty severe security concerns. And if you misjudge or misfire on one of those security concerns, it can have very large consequences. So it's a tough balancing act, and one that I think both of those factors should be given proper weight. Okay, that's the reaction of Tim Pawlenty, citizen and former governor of Minnesota, now as CEO of the Financial Services Roundtable. How is your organization reacting to the news of this change to immigration policy? The organization I represent hasn't taken a formal position on this. Individual companies or company leaders might, but our focus and charge and charter relates to financial service, public policy, and this isn't something that we've been asked to weigh in on. We've certainly seen, though, members of your organization react. Lloyd Blankfein with a voicemail message to 30,000+ employees today. How big a deal is immigration to your membership? When you look at the priorities for the Financial Services Roundtable, is immigration reform one of them? No, that's not something we've historically been asked to weigh in. It doesn't mean it's not an important issue. It's just not within the scope of the work that we're asked to do by our members. And look, the country is a country of immigration. Everybody who's watching this show, unless you're a native-born Native American, is a descendant of an immigrant or an immigrant himself or herself. So we should celebrate that, but it needs to be legal and it needs to be safe. And that statement that I just made shouldn't be viewed as a radical statement. Let me ask you about an executive action perhaps more germane to your membership, that being the executive action on on financial reform signed this morning. Let's listen to what President Donald Trump had to say after signing that executive action.
It's almost impossible now to start a small business, and it's virtually impossible to expand your existing business because of regulations. And because if the banks don't loan you money, Dodd-Frank is a disaster. We're going to be doing a big number on Dodd-Frank.
All right, we're going to do a big number on Dodd-Frank. How should we interpret that? And from your perspective, what should be done here to financial regulation under this president? Well, the president's made a number of comments about Dodd-Frank, but they've been fairly general, so we're not yet clear what he means in detail, and a number of his people who are going to be working on this at the cabinet level and below haven't yet been confirmed and aren't in place. So the details of this are important, and they're yet to be determined. But some things they might look at would include, some reasonable adjustments to Dodd-Frank, so you still protect consumers and the taxpayers in the economy, but making sure you also don't suffocate and stifle things that are needed in the economy, like lending to small businesses and consumers. And there's a lot of examples within Dodd-Frank where some tweaks would be in order that would strike that balance. Last question here quickly. A goal of the FSR is more regulatory transparency. Does today's action get us any closer to that? Well, it might. For example, if you have the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which is, helpful to consumers in many respects, but it's run by one person without oversight by Congress in terms of appropriations or a board. Many of these agencies have those kinds of due process components. The CFPB in its current form lacks that. We think that would be a good process reform.